Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. For years and years and years, I've tried to make the argument that the main reason we have a serious housing crisis in this country and that we've not been able to plan for future forward projection is because, yeah, you've guessed it, folks, we've got open-door immigration. And I've tried to make that point. I've tried to make the argument. If you have literally no control on the numbers coming to your country, how on earth can you plan for the future? Now, I've tried to make that debate through European elections and general elections, and I've given out the statistic that we need to build a new dwelling in this country, one new home every 4 minutes, just to cope with current levels of immigration. And I've been met with, well, mostly abuse. How dare I? How dare I attempt to make a connection between housing and immigration? And earlier on this year, Peter Bone, Tory MP for Wellingborough, he tried to pick up that theme to see if he could get some sense out of the government. Here's Peter Bone back in February.
Would the Secretary of State agree that the demand for housing would fall if we could reduce 1/3 people coming into this country each year?
Mr. Speaker, I've looked at this carefully and I'm not sure it actually makes the kind of difference that my honourable friend believes. 2/3 of housing demand has got nothing to do with immigration. It's to do with natural population growth, in particular people living longer, and that will be something that has to be catered for regardless. And despite, even if immigration was to fall to zero, for example, we would still have a deficit of homes of some 2 million and people would still be in overcrowded homes, so we'd still have to keep building.
So did you hear that? Peter Bone said, well, we've got 1/3 people net coming into the country. Surely if we reduce that number, there'll be less pressure on housing. And did you hear the reaction? They were booing. They were booing, as if, how dare you even touch this subject? And there was the Minister, Sajid Javid, answering, saying, actually, Mr. Bone, you're wrong. 2/3 of new housing demand is because of natural population growth. Well, today, there's a report out from Migration Watch, headed up by Lord Green. And you know something? Over the years, never once has one of their statistics ever been proved to be wrong. And Migration Watch basically say that Sajid Javid was talking complete and utter nonsense, that it simply wasn't true. The fact is, and brace yourself for this statistic, that in the last decade, nearly 90% of additional households in England have been headed by someone born abroad. 90% of new households headed by somebody born abroad. So is it time we had an open, honest debate on this? Gosh, I've tried so hard. Here's me a couple of years ago talking to the other party leaders. We are talking about a market, folks. I know none of you have ever worked in business, but we're talking about a market. And markets are about demand and supply. And I just wonder, I'm curious, could I get any recognition from any of you that the demand side of this equation is that a rapidly rising population due to open-door immigration, started by Ed Miliband's Labour Party in the late 1990s, has directly contributed towards the housing crisis. Is there any flicker of recognition from any of you? And the answer, of course, is that from Ed Miliband and Nicola Sturgeon and the other leaders on that panel in that second leaders' general election debate in 2015, they did not flicker at all. In fact, they all said it was outrageous. There's no connection. We're simply not building enough houses. So this is an issue on which I've been tearing my hair out now for years. Is it that our political leaders are simply lying to us? Or is it they're just too stupid to understand how a market and how demand and supply works? And I'm asking you tonight, is it time we had a proper, open, honest debate about the housing crisis in this country and its link to a rapidly increasing population because of levels of immigration? And if you agree with me that it is time our government, our ministers came clean, that we started to talk about this properly, then call me on 0345 6060 973, or perhaps you think, as the other party leaders all do, that I've got this completely wrong, I've misunderstood the problem. Well, in that case, you can text to 848 850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, any opinion within reason. And you can watch me here on Facebook live from London and comment there too. Andy from Nottingham is my first caller. Andy, have I got this right or wrong?
I'm incensed, Nigel, and a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
Good evening.
I'm absolutely incensed. I'm trying to cook a meal here, and I've had to just down every tool. there isn't even a conversation to be had. It's not even. I can't believe what not you've been saying, but what has been said.
Yes.
The facts are this, and the facts are that the indigenous British people's birth rate is 1.64, roughly the same as everybody across Europe. So if we're replacing 2 people with 1.64 people, which is not an if, that is a fact.
Yes.
We don't need any more housing.
Well, Andy, just to back you up, I've got the graphs and the stats here, and in fact, demand for new houses from UK-born citizens has fallen over the course of the last decade, which is exactly in line with your numbers, isn't it?
Well, it's not my numbers. I mean, you can go on any...
Well, you've made the point about the replacement, 1.64 for every couple. So, you know, we actually... It's not surprising that demand is falling, but overall, demand for housing is rocketing. I made the point, Andy, we need to build a new dwelling every 4 minutes just to cope with current levels of immigration. So tell me, Andy, because I failed. I totally failed with Cameron and Miliband and Clegg and all of them. They wouldn't even engage me in this debate. Is it because, Andy, do you think they simply want to lie to us, or they just don't understand it?
Nigel, what if I answered that question? I'd get cut off. So I would sooner. Okay. I honestly believe you know the answer to that question.
Well, I know the answer to it. It's obvious. In fact, actually, I reckon the average 8 or 9-year-old at school that's been taught logic could see their way through this, and our political party leaders can't. Andy, you're incensed. I'm incensed. We're still not having an open, honest debate. I hope tonight's show helps kickstart that, and I thank you for the call. Debbie says to me on Twitter, "Oh, Nigel, you connect everything to immigration. Oh, it's so boring. Let's not discuss it. Let's just stay, Debbie, with open borders and accept the fact our kids can never have houses of their own." Debbie clearly doesn't think there's a link. I don't get it. My concern is not only the amount of available housing, but the eligibility criteria used to provide housing benefits. That comes from Ollie. Well, yes, Ollie, big debate linked to this, not directly, indirectly, but important. Bradley is calling me from Slough. He's a new caller to the show. Welcome, Bradley.
Hi, Nigel. How's it going?
Well, fine, but I've been trying for many years for us to have a proper debate about this, and I don't think I'm getting very far, Bradley.
It's interesting. I think I can see both sides of the argument, to be honest, Nigel. But I think it all boils down to maths. You know, there's only a finite amount of space on the planet. So even if we were to block off all our borders now and, you know, solve the housing problem in the short term, it's a problem that's going to come up. It might not come up in our lifetime, but, you know, generations to come, you know, there's going to be more people. There's only so many.
Well, certainly, Bradley, on the planet. I mean, I think when I was born there were about 4 billion people. There's now, last I saw, 7.3 billion people. So sure, there are more people on the planet. But it is interesting, Bradley, that the UK population had pretty much stabilised at around about 55 million people. And it was there right through the 1970s, right through the 1980s, into the early 90s. And it's now 65 million. And they're the official figures. And I tell you what, I'm sure you can chuck another couple of million on top of that. So all I'm saying, Bradley, and we might say it's a good thing, but whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, isn't it madness not to link the number of new houses we need to a population that has gone up as quickly as it has as a direct result of immigration policies?
I mean, yeah, that is one aspect of it, but the other aspect, I mean, even if we were to close off all border, the population of the country would still increase exponentially.
Why?
Why? Because people have children, and their children have children, and we're living older, and and we're not as susceptible to diseases and dying, and I think
all of that's true. All of that's true. Although, the point I made that 90% of new householders in the last decade are foreign-born people is still a pretty stunning figure, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's incredible, but I'm from the point of view where I don't see people's faces and races. We're human, we're a global species. We shouldn't be seeing borders and differentiating. Obviously, you have to protect the country's interests.
So, would you have no borders, Bradley?
In an ideal world, but unfortunately it's not an ideal world, then I would have no borders.
Yeah, I mean, ideal worlds of total free movement of people or the communist ideology or, ideal worlds very, very rarely work in practice. Bradley, you and I clearly have a slightly different perspective on this, but would it be better had Sajid Javid answered that question from Peter Bone in the House of Commons in February of this year? Wouldn't it have been better, as Migration Watch suggests, if he'd answered the question honestly?
No, I agree. I mean, that, statistics will show facts and people will take those statistics on and build their own picture in their head, but if you only show one side of a statistic, then
okay,
the other side of the picture doesn't get drawn.
Yeah, I'm not sure there is another side to this particular one, because we're simply talking about mathematics and demand and supply. And Bradley, we could have a separate debate about the benefits or otherwise of immigration to our society, to the jobs market. I'm just talking about demand supply. But I thank you very much for your point of view and your call. Nigel, the housing crisis is down to governments who have totally ignored the impact that uncontrolled immigration has caused. It's down entirely to government and mismanagement, says David. Well, interestingly, what Migration Watch say today is that not only have the government massively underestimated for the last 15 to 20 years the impact immigration would have on housing, but that their projections for the future are massively underestimating the scale of the problem that we face. Migration Watch today effectively slammed the government for not telling us the truth about the link between mass immigration and demand for housing. Indeed, Sajid Javid telling the House of Commons that 2/3 of new houses are needed for natural population growth, and that simply isn't true. When over the course of the last decade, 90% of new households have been headed up by somebody who was born abroad. And okay, folks, you may well tell me that having a housing crisis is a small price to pay because you think mass immigration has been a huge benefit to this country. And that's fine. I'm very keen to hear from you if that's your point of view. But can we please have an honest conversation about the two things here I'm trying to link? Population increase through immigration and a shortage of housing. I've got a friend who perplexingly won't accept any correlation between immigration, lack of supply and high prices. An odd rejection of supply and demand rules, says Vic, I couldn't get any correlation. I couldn't get a flicker of interest out of Ed Miliband and Clegg and all of the others. They simply thought I was wrong and that the answer was just to build more houses. But just building more houses, if you've no idea how many people are coming in, is rather a difficult thing to do. Mike is calling me from Newham, and you called into the show. Good evening, Mike.
Hi, Nigel. How's it going?
It's going well. It's fine. Mike, I'd like to have an honest debate with our leaders about this, and it doesn't seem to be possible.
Right, yeah. I mean, okay, let's have an honest debate. I mean, I think one of the big... the elephant in the room, well, first of all, we've had governments not building enough council housing altogether, full stop.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
I agree on that.
Yep.
And that's the main problem. Two, there's thousands of homes left empty because they're owned by millionaires who decide to use them as a way to make themselves money instead of actually using them for the public good. I think that's the other problem.
These are this is the big Chinese money or Hong Kong money or whatever it is, as you say, buying apartments, not even bothering to rent them out, just having them as a capital asset, yeah?
Yeah, and that's not just done by foreign investors. It's just generally millionaires in this country. And three, I think trying to pit immigrants against ordinary people, immigrants and national people here, I think it's quite disingenuous because, I mean, if I'm wrong, like your kind of politics is free market, let the market be, and it's not really provided the houses. And what we need is we need state investment in housing. That's immigrants aren't the problem. The fact is I think under Corbyn we will have someone who's ready to invest in housing. But at the minute, we've had governments, including Labour governments, who have not been able to...
But Mike, how can you plan for the number of houses you might need if you haven't got a clue how many people are coming into the country? It doesn't work, does it?
Well, you build the houses anyway. What are you saying? Don't build the houses?
No, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting it's very difficult to plan for school places. It's very difficult to plan for hospital provision. It's very difficult to plan for housing provision if you simply haven't got a grip on the number of people coming into the country. We had, and it is worth reminding people, Mike, that from 1950 until nearly the year 2000, we had net migration into this country averaging 30,000 a year. We had that for 60 years. It was settled. We had by far the best levels of integrated immigrant communities of any country in Europe. And since Mr. Blair and his friends came to power, it's all a bit different, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, can I just make one more quick point? I think since, Thatcher and Blair and stuff and, neoliberal economics, we've seen a massive wealth distribution from the bottom to the top.
Yep.
And that's what's causing all our social problems, including houses and the NHS.
Well, it's not helping. I certainly agree with that. There's been a huge transfer of wealth. And there are many ways. I mean, interestingly, Mike, one of the biggest transfers of wealth, and it's a different subject, but one of the biggest transfers of wealth from poor to rich has been renewable energy, where very rich landowners have paid a fortune to site wind turbines on their land, and it's everybody else that picks up the tab. Mike, I thank you for your points. I thank you very much for your call. Thank you, Nigel, for continually raising the immigration debate. It's affecting our roads, services and housing, not to mention the Greenbelt. Keep going, says Angry in England via Twitter. Well, I do keep talking about this. What is interesting, I think overall what is really interesting, is that for year after year, in the last decade, immigration and the effects of it has been the number one issue in British politics when people are polled. And yet, ever since the referendum, it's rather disappeared. Nobody is talking about it, and I guess one of the reasons for that is that UKIP is not posing quite the threat to the establishment that it was prior to that referendum result. But it is still an absolutely vital issue, and I know that some of you yawn and would rather not talk about it, but hey, we are trying to deal with facts. David is calling me from Highgate. David, good evening.
Yes, good evening, Nigel. I'm really glad you're talking about the housing issue. I'd like to mention a couple of statistics, which you didn't actually mention. I think, honestly, think you ought to. That this is the only society in the developed world, as far as I'm aware, where somebody who is earning the same amount as the leader of the country, Theresa May, I believe it's about $170,000 a year, is unable to buy a small house in a slum area of the capital city. That's a fact. Does that apply anywhere else in Europe? Surely not. Anywhere else in the world? I don't know. Another fact, Nigel, I think really you should be promulgating this one, is that if you go back to the early 80s, I think the official population of London was 6.5 million. The official population of London now is nearly 9 million. I think you can safely add 750,000 of illegals. What we're talking about in one generation is the population of London, where the housing crisis is beyond catastrophic, has gone up more than 50%. Does that apply to any other capital city in Europe? Certainly not.
No, absolutely not.
Does it apply to any other capital city in the world? Perhaps not. Those are the two factors which, beyond anything else, are illustrative of the absolute catastrophe.
Yeah, no, David, I don't disagree with either of those points that you've made. London house pricing is absolutely astronomical. Demand and supply is the biggest factor in that, but I do think the amount of overseas investment, the amount of money coming in to the UK property market is part of that. It's actually one of the reasons, David, why the pound, I think, has been overvalued for years. The amount of money that's been coming into this country to buy UK property. But, David, could we contemplate in some way reducing the flow of money coming into this country to buy real estate and property?
Yes, indeed. And I believe even Cameron himself, who was complicit in it, huge property inflation, the asset bubble inflation shambles. He said himself that there was many millions, maybe even billions of dirty money being laundered by third world despots, etc., into the housing market, and of course depriving hundreds of thousands of local citizens of their right to even a one-bed flat. Shameful.
No, David, I completely sympathise with that argument. What's interesting is that almost everybody at some point talks about that argument in politics, but no one's ever done anything. What could we do? Could we make it illegal to buy a property and not rent it out? Could we limit the amount of money that comes in? I mean, I'm just fascinated to know, how is it in a modern global economy that we can deal with this?
Well, I think it's fairly straightforward, Nigel. I think that virtually every other country in the world, let's say Singapore, which also has a fairly ruthless competitive capitalist system like we have, they do not allow foreigners to purchase property on a buy-to-leave basis. We positively encourage it. It is shameful. It's just intolerable, and the government happy to go along with it because, quite frankly, well, I mean, my genuine feelings about this are unprintable.
Yeah. David, you made some very good points indeed. Thank you. And David making the point that the population of London effectively has gone up by 30% in the last 2 decades. No wonder the underground's so busy. No wonder it's difficult to get your kids into primary schools. No wonder the housing crisis is as serious as it is. It's absolutely ridiculous. They can't add up. We've a problem with overcrowding in schools, doctors' surgeries, all other areas of our life. And these people are meant to be the brains of the country, says Anne in Blackburn. I know, Anne, and I couldn't get a flicker of recognition out of them. They would not make the link between a rapidly rising population and a housing crisis. Kenny is calling me from Shadwell in East London. Good evening, Kenny.
Hi, Nigel. I'd first like to say it's an absolute honour and a privilege to chat with yourself, because I voted for Brexit and I've researched about the European Union for many years. I've read books and particularly like Daniel Hannan. He read some good books called Why Vote Leave.
I remember.
And another book is here called Marriage, Why Britain Should Leave the European Union.
So we voted to leave the European Union, which, Kenny, means that we're able to take back control of the numbers of people that come into the country. Would it be logical, Kenny, to say that if we reduce substantially the numbers of people coming in, that it would ease some of the burden of the housing crisis?
That's absolutely correct.
So why, Kenny, maybe you've got the answer, because I don't know what it is, why is it that our mainstream political party leaders deny that point?
Well, political partisan reasons is the main point. You know, a lot of them are married to the European Union. A lot of them,
So are they? So, Kenny, are they lying to us deliberately, or are they just stupid?
Probably a bit of both.
Kenny, I find the whole thing a mystery. Kenny, I thank you very much for your call. I'm trying to establish a link between the numbers of people coming into this country, the rise in our population, and the need to build new houses. Here's a fact, folks. We need to build a new dwelling every 4 minutes in this country just to cope with current levels of immigration. And yet, when I say this, on the radio, on the telly, or particularly to the other party leaders, as I tried so hard to do in the general election of 2015, they just look back at me blankly and shake their heads and say there's no link. And indeed, Sajid Javid, Cabinet Minister in the House of Commons this year, said, oh, no, that's a complete misreading of it. 2/3 of new housing demand comes from natural population growth. It isn't true, and Migration Watch have made that very clear today. I just want us to have a proper, honest debate about it. Parliament doesn't do anything about this because they all have a roof over their heads. Well, that's what Caroline in Hants thinks. Nigel, if government restricted people to help the housing market, causing prices to drop, how will they deal with the reduction in house prices, forcing the young who managed to go into negative equity? That is a very fair point, and we haven't seen negative equity for a long, long time. We did see it back in the early 1990s, and it was pretty crippling. But I suspect amongst the younger generation that actually the worry is not whether people go into negative equity. The worry is they can't get onto the housing ladder at all. And I'm particularly keen in the last half of this show to hear from any of you out there, young people working who just frankly find it impossible to ever see themselves owning a home. Because I've got the feeling that Generation Rent, as it's now known, you know, people at 40 are still renting and not even contemplating buying. So if you're young and frustrated, please let me know how you feel. I'm going north of the border to Dundee to speak to Keely. Keely, good evening.
Hi Nigel, pleasure to talk to you. I'm lucky, I'm in my 50s, I have my own home.
Yes.
I've got a daughter in her 20s, tons of their friends. I've got husbands, I've got good jobs. They can't even afford to save. The reason being, if they even did manage to get deposit for a mortgage, the job situation is that you're always worried you're going to lose your job, then you'd end up in bed and breakfast, because unfortunately not everybody's got rich parents, which seems to be the people that come on the phone that seem to live in London.
Yeah, I think, Keely, you're right. I think it's, I mean, I don't know what the percentage is or whether the figure's even available. But I'm pretty convinced that the majority of people under 30, let's say, who buy a property do so because their parents have helped them with the money. Otherwise, it is virtually impossible. But are you saying, Keely, that, I mean, we know that in London this problem is absolutely chronic. Is it a problem there in Dundee?
Let me tell you, Nigel. Savage Javid needs to come up to Dundee and all the surrounding areas. The man is talking absolute rubbish. 3 out of 5 homes, and I know this for a fact, I worked a couple of days a week in housing. 3 out of 5 properties in this area belong to people that have came from another country. I don't care who comes on the radio and tells me any different. I live in the real world. My daughter and her friends.
Does Nicola Sturgeon, Keely? Does Nicola Sturgeon live in the real world?
She doesn't know it. She doesn't appear anywhere. She's in. I can't. I'll get jailed if I start talking about her.
Okay,
my
so
daughter and her friends. You need to have more than at least 3 children, Nigel, to get a social housing these days. And it seems to be that people that come from another country, if they have more than they get the choice of the houses first.
So you feel there's unfairness there too, Keely? Yeah.
More children. Excuse me, Nigel?
You feel there's unfairness there too, yeah?
Unfairness. It'll never change with any of these governments, both Labour and Conservative. None of them will change it. None of them will. They're all in denial and they're all telling lies.
So what should... Keely, come on. I mean, I understand your frustration with this situation, and I do wholeheartedly agree with your criticism of our leading politicians, who are very much in a bubble and don't seem to understand how tough it is out there. What do you think needs to happen?
Well, for a start, you've got to close the borders. You can't keep letting people in. And for these people that say that it's to do with the elderly, and Savage Java talking about people getting elderly, what a disgrace.
Would you, Keely, would you close the borders completely? Would you say no immigration for a few years?
The country out.
Fine,
okay.
We get
people homes.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. No, Keely there making a very, very strong, powerful point, and she's pretty angry about what's going on. Luke is calling from the West Midlands, from Bromsgrove. Good evening, Luke.
Good evening, Nigel. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Now, I'm trying to establish, Luke, a link between immigration, a rising population, and a problem with housing. I'm not even trying to do it in a contentious way at all. I'm just saying, surely, we have to acknowledge that link before we can think about, or before government can think about what the solutions may be.
I think you can look into that link, but there's a few things that I sort of wanted to point out first.
Go on then, I'm all ears.
You mentioned truth and honesty, and it's about time that we were told the truth and people were being honest with us.
Yep.
Coming from yourself, Nigel, that seems very hypocritical after the lies that you told throughout the Leave campaign, 350 million into the...
Luke, now look, we operate a very simple rule on this show. 3 strikes and you're out, all right? I never mentioned 350 million, never ever did it, never said it, all right? So, but I will give you the chance to tell me one lie I told you in the campaign, please.
You're talking about honesty and truth, and I just think the campaigns that you follow...
No. You just called me a liar on air. All right, fine. We believe in free speech. It's LBC. It's what we're here for, and that's fine. You just called me a liar, and I'm asking you, tell me what I lied about in the campaign.
No. I didn't call you a liar. What I called you is a hypocrite for you to say that it's about time people were honest with us when you and your campaigns were not honest with us during the Brexit campaign.
Okay, tell me. You said no. Look. Let's not play this silly game. You said I'd lied in the campaign. Tell me how.
The Breaking Point poster, for one.
Well, that was a photograph of actually what was happening on Europe's borders as part of the Merkel madness. You might not have liked it, but it wasn't untrue, was it?
There was a lot of articles around that where you were proven to be quite incorrect about that image.
Over a million people came into Germany in 1 year.
Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. Why would you not allow people to live wherever they want on this planet?
Because they don't. Because if you do that, you don't get integration, you get separation, you get division, you get massive pressure on public services, and it's a wholly irresponsible thing to do when the first duty of government is to look after its own people.
You're 100% correct. It is to look after your own people. However, just because of where you live should not determine your quality of life. And if someone from another country that is worse off than myself wants to come and live here, I'm more than happily.
All right. So what would you find, Luke? What would you find to be an acceptable number? Another million, 10 million, 20 million? I mean, do you think there's a limit on this somewhere?
As many as are happy to come, but just in regards to the immigration housing sort of situation, you're obviously mentioning that we don't have enough houses to sort of keep this level of immigration coming in, and I think the first thing you said, in fact, actually, Nigel, I've been listening since 7 o'clock. The first thing you said when you came on was, and I'm paraphrasing here, is essentially it's the fault of immigration why we don't have enough houses now.
What I said, Luke, was that there is... Okay, right, let me ask you this. Do you accept my contention that there is a direct link between immigration, a rising population, and a shortage of affordable housing?
Yes. How do we fix that is the question.
Fine, okay, well now you tell me. You tell me how to fix it.
Okay, so people like the likes of Lord Ashcroft, people like Apple, people like Aaron Banks, you're a very good friend of yours. If you were all Lewis Hamilton, if you were all paying your taxes, do you not think we'd be able to fund hospitals, we'd be able to fund schools, we'd be able to fund housing for other people? Not just that, but millionaires, as some of your previous callers have said, millionaires that buy property and then just and don't rent them out there.
I think there is a problem there. I think there is a problem there, and I think the amount of foreign money that comes into the UK housing market, not just in London, elsewhere too, I think it is a real problem. But I tell you what, Luke, I haven't got the solution.
Taxes. What about the tax avoidance? Can we just go back to that tax?
Well, you could ban duty-free cigarettes, and you could say to people they can't use ISAs anymore, and you could put everyone's tax rates up. There's all sorts of things you could do, but just bear in mind that a lot of people, business people, invest money all over the world for thoroughly legitimate reasons too, and that is worth remembering. Not everybody who invests money overseas is doing it simply to avoid tax.
Avoidance, yeah, $32 trillion through tax avoidance, through, granted, may not be illegal, but definitely shady schemes, which if they were paying their fair share, then we wouldn't have the issues.
Well, all I would say, Luke, to end that, it's a slightly separate conversation, but actually 27% of the tax revenue in this country comes from 1% of the working population. Hey, Luke, I gave you a fair go, did I not? For somebody who called me a liar. I think I was more than fair. Mike is calling me from Northwood. Mike, hello.
Hi, Nigel, how are you?
I'm very well. Where are you from, Mike?
Nigel, I'm from California. I've been living in London for a few years. Absolutely love it.
Right.
First time caller with you. Don't really agree with a lot of what you say, but find you hugely entertaining, so good on you for that one.
Well, it's all about free speech, Mike, and whether people agree or disagree, I do my absolute best to get them engaged on this programme. So, Mike, I've been making this link between immigration, rising population, and a housing problem. Am I right to try to establish that link and have an honest debate about it?
Absolutely. Now, in the spirit of you saying, let's have an honest debate about it, then I pose this one question back to you. I think the answer to your question is absolutely right. I suggest, however, that the question is incomplete, because my suggestion is, by your own admission about 45 minutes ago, you said that when you were born, the population was around 4 billion, something like that.
I did, yeah.
And now we're talking about 7 billion. Now, having lived across the U.S., here in Europe, spent many, many years across the Middle East, now for my business, I ask you to name me one place on the planet where this is not the exact same issue that everybody's facing. From New York to San Francisco to London to Shanghai to Beijing, Singapore, Dubai.
No, Mike, actually, I'm going to disagree with you. I can't think of a single other European country, there's sort of 30 of them, I can't think of a single other European country that has got as acute a housing problem as we've got in this country.
No, acute is all relative. Can you name a country that in the United Kingdom, in the European Union, that does not have a housing crisis?
Oh yes, Lithuania. Lithuania, whose population, since they joined the European Union, has now fallen by nearly 25%. There are vast areas of it that are boarded up. Mike, I take the point. There is a global problem with resources, housing and everything. I just feel in this country we've been less than honest with ourselves about it. Migration Watch make the point. The government is still not being honest with itself and the rest of us, and the problem is set to worsen. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. I want an honest debate. If we have to build a new dwelling every 4 minutes for current levels of immigration, we have, I suggest, a bit of a problem. Most of you, whether you agree or not, accept that that link is there. I'm very keen still to hear from young people who simply can't get on the housing ladder and are frustrated by what's going on. And equally, I'd love those of you that agree with me that there is a problem here. We need some solutions. So please, see in the next 10 minutes if you can find me some. I'm going to go to Sian, who's calling from Lewisham. Good evening, Sian.
Hello.
Hello there. Right, so what do you think?
So I just had a little question for you, really. I just wondered that if we were going to do something like controlled immigration, how it would be decided, like who would come in, etc. And the reason being that I'm asking is because I know people from all sorts of different backgrounds and generations that I wouldn't even expect to have those views, that do have those views. And I was just saying,
well,
that,
yeah, I mean, Sian, you've got, there's actually a surprisingly large number of people in the country now want to completely close the borders. Now, that is not going to happen. You know, we're living in a modern global economy. That's not going to happen. But actually, when you ask people, do you think we should have more control over this issue? It is 75% plus of the population think we should have more control. And arguably, Sian, it was the reason, above all, that tipped the result in the referendum in favour of leave. What would we do, going ahead from here? Well, I made the point earlier that from 1950 until nearly the end of the decade, the end of the millennium, that net migration ran at about 30,000 a year. It's been running as high as 300,000 a year in the last 10 years. So what do? Well, you have a points-based system so that you decide how many people come into your country. It's not a hard thing to do. I mean, there are 200 countries out there in the world that say yes or no to people coming in. So we could do it. And would that solve the housing crisis? No. Would it help alleviate some of the future problems? Yes. So I'm not pretending, Sian, of itself that it's a perfect answer. I mean, what would you like to see as a system?
I don't know what I'd want the system to be, but I just think it's weird that, like, for example, people that are from other countries that are maybe now even British, they feel like they have a rightful place here, but then others don't. So I don't know, when do you decide that people have a rightful place and that they don't?
Well, you're right, of course. There are lots of people. There are lots of first-generation migrants living in Britain who think we should have strict immigration controls, and that irony is seen by some. But hey, you have to have a limit somewhere, Sian. I think that really is the point. And I mean, do you think that net migration has been running at too high a level for the last 15, 20 years?
I think that's quite a scary thought, because I'm mixed race and both of my parents are mixed race, and I guess if it hadn't, I don't know, if it hadn't existed, then I wouldn't even be here myself.
Well, the argument, Sian, the argument about immigration in the referendum had nothing to do with race. Actually, we were talking about white people from across Europe having an open door coming here. So one of the good things about the immigration debate in that referendum is it barely touched on race at all at any point, which I think was a good thing. Sian, I thank you for your call. And Sian, looking for answers, looking for solutions. We all are. Paul on Facebook says there are 1.5 million properties empty in the UK. There are builders unemployed. If only there was a government that wanted to get things done. I don't know, Paul, whether 1.5 million is right. I thought it was more like 750,000. I could perhaps be out of date. I've got a caller from Oxford. Mamadou is calling from Oxford. Good evening.
Hello, good evening, Nigel.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
I hope we can have an honest debate.
Well, we'll do our best. Have a crack.
Okay. First of all, I to admire your attitude, even though I don't agree with 9 out of 10 of what you say.
Right, okay.
I think you have a very strong character. I think you're not afraid to speak the truth. But I think you're a politician as well, and you have the tendencies of the people you sometimes blame of not listening to you.
Well, you tell me, Mamadou. You tell me, where have I, Mamadou, where have I got this wrong? You know, I'm saying that we need to be more open and more honest and establish the fact that there is a direct link between the housing problem and a rising population because of immigration. Am I wrong to say that?
No, you are not, Nigel, which
Okay.
I agree with you fully.
Okay.
The issue I wanted to raise with you is, as much as you talk about immigration in this country, as in people coming into England, I don't hear you speak about immigration going the other way. Okay, I come from a country, a very small country in the western part of Africa called Gambia. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I have.
It was a British colony. We got independent in 1965. Right. When the British Empire left my country, they left us without a single university. They built a college.
Okay, but Mamadou, that is 1965, and it is 50 years ago.
I'm not. I wasn't born then.
Okay.
If you listen to me, that's why I said I hope we can have an honest debate.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the clock ticks. The clock ticks. So please bring me back to housing. And what should we do to alleviate this problem?
What? Well, I want to ask you the same question because we've got the same problem in my country.
Yeah.
And that's a direct result of British people coming to my country, migrating to my country, and buying properties.
Okay.
For the past 20 years.
Oh, do you mean holiday properties and things like that?
No, not holiday properties. I mean, people actually living there, people retiring there. You know, we've got engineers from Britain. We've got, you know, it's endless. It's all kinds of immigration, not holiday property.
Yeah. Well, do you know something, Mamadou? That problem, of course, exists in places like North Cornwall, in places like North Norfolk, where wealthy people from London buy homes and they go there for half term or for Christmas or whatever it is and completely price out local people from the market. So this is not just a problem that's limited to London, and it isn't just a problem limited to the United Kingdom. And I don't know, you know, the housing market in Gambia, I don't, but it's a very interesting point that you've made. And certainly, I know in parts of Brittany, there are French people who say, what are all these English doing? Coming here, buying up all the properties, and we ourselves can't get on the ladder. So I'm not pretending this problem is confined either just to the United Kingdom. But what I do know is of the 30 or so countries that are here in Europe, we have got the biggest and the most serious problem. And my last caller on this evening is Kevin in Bridgend. Kevin, you've got 40 seconds to make your point.
Good evening. Supply and demand economics would say that you put more money into the housing system, you get more houses built, etc.
Yep.
That then suppresses the value of the houses, and that directly contradicts the supporter of the right-wing parties, such as the Conservatives, whereby there are a lot of second owners, third owners, and buy-to-let property owners that are members of the party. Like, the value of my house is completely indifferent. I don't care. It's the only property I own. If it was hard to own, I wouldn't care. And therefore, the problem is immigration at the top level, but it's certainly not the immigrant as the problem. It's the problem the government's not managing the system for us. And I'll be glad when we get a new government in that will.
Well, and you can't manage it, Kevin, and I've made this point a couple of times tonight, but you can't actually manage future housing demand if you don't have controls on the numbers of people coming into the country, because how could you? Kevin, I thank you for your call. I thank all of you for your calls. My own view, my final thought on this is that we will never, ever, ever get to grips with this problem in any way at all until government are honest with itself and with the country, and to recognise that there is a link. A big reduction in migration into Britain will help to alleviate future problems in the housing market. It will not, of itself, solve all of our problems, and I'd be the first person to accept that. But I still tear my hair out because none of the other party leaders in this country will acknowledge there is even a link of any kind, which I find totally and utterly extraordinary. Thank you very much for your calls, your texts, your tweets, for those that have followed us on Facebook.